session, so I think when those people come in, we will. Here's something.
Well, we want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Ginger Gossman. I am a staff member here at the coordinating board, but I have never been part of the NSRP program or any of that work, so I am here today just to guide conversation and to help us stay on task to accomplish our goals for today. What we'd like to do is just start, however, with introductions as we go around our interestingly shaped circle here this morning. So also, we want to thank you very much for your time. I know it takes a big chunk out of your time to come travel and spend your morning with us, and we really, really appreciate it. So our oddly shaped circle is here because this meeting is being webcast. It is a public meeting, and in the interest of transparency, the coordinating board broadcasts its meetings that are open to the public. So you will be online and you will be recorded, so you can go back and watch yourself. But that's why we have this set up here. This is the most convenient way for us to make sure the webcast is produced with the highest quality possible. And it also works out that this is where our microphones are. So just so you know, your little red light needs to be on in order for you to be mic'd. We'll ask those of you at the table to please share your microphones. But with that, we'll go ahead and get started with introductions. We have a few people who are still coming in, but what I'd like to do is start with our work group member who is calling in. So if you would start us off this morning, please introduce yourself, caller.
My name is Polly Church, and I'm the Dean of the University of St. Thomas Carolyn Otis Peavy School of Nursing in Houston.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us. Let's start on this side.
Good morning. My name is Ume. I am the Dean of Nursing at Tarrant County College. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Nina Almasi. I'm the department chair for the professional nursing programs at Austin Community College, which include the associate degree in nursing and the RN to BSN program.
Good morning. My name is Julie Ortega. I'm the program director for associate degree nursing at Navarro College.
Hi, Cindy Zolnarek, CEO of the Texas Nurses Association.
Good morning. Julie Davis, General Counsel, Texas Nurses Association.
Good morning. Marla Urban Roseman from Texas State University. I'm the director of the School of Nursing.
Good morning. I'm Tracy Cooper. I'm the executive director of nursing at Temple College.
Good morning. Nancy Fehrenwald, Dean of the College of Nursing at Texas A&M University.
Good morning. I'm Pam Lauer from the Texas Center for Nursing Workforce Studies at the Department of State Health Services.
Jan Hooper. I'm education consultant at the Board of Nursing.
Linda Lane, Assistant Dean for Finance and Administration with Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center.
Good morning, Steve Johnson, Chancellor, Western Governors University, Texas.
Stacy Silverman, Interim Assistant Commissioner in the Division of Academic Quality and Workforce here at the Coordinating Board.
I'm Julie Eklund. I am the Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding here at the Coordinating Board, and our division implements the Nursing Shortage Reduction Program.
Good morning, Linda Yoder. I'm a professor at the University of Texas at Austin.
Hi, I'm Beth Merwin. I'm the Dean of the College of Nursing and Health Innovation at the University of Texas at Arlington.
Good morning, Beverly Skloss, Education Consultant, Texas Board of Nursing.
And I'm Sally Williams, actually with the Dallas-Fort Worth Hospital Council Foundation in the DFW area, but I'm also representing this Texas Center for Nursing Workforce Studies along with Pam.
Good morning. I am Jonas Ngu, Dean of Nursing at Ranger College in Ranger, Texas.
Great, thanks. Thanks to all of you again for spending your time with us this morning. So the purpose of the meeting today is a few things. One is some level setting to make sure that we all have a similar understanding of the nursing shortage reduction program. I know many of you have been steeped in this for some time, but let's just make sure we share the same information at the same time, so when we start a discussion, we have the same information. The other purpose is to really set up the beginning of our work together and establish a feedback loop so that we can hear from you about your experiences with the program, because that's going to be really important for us as we move forward. And then the final purpose is really to just establish what the next steps are going to be for us as a work group, or for you as a work group, and for the progression of the coordinating board's work on the study. So just a few protocol issues. If you would like to speak, feel free to raise your hand and we'll address you. I have asked that you all have little sticky note pads. So if an issue comes up where you feel like it's not quite the right time for you to bring it up, feel free to write it down, and we're going to start a parking lot with your sticky notes. So feel free to use them for that purpose. And then we have a short time. The meeting is scheduled from 10 a.m. to noon. So I'd just like to get your feeling. Would you like to take a formal break, or would you just like to leave as needed? Leave is needed. Okay, is that good with everyone? Okay, perfect. All right, so what I'd like to do then is formally read the statute, the purpose of our why we are gathered here today. Well, it sounds like I'm starting a wedding. I'm not. We are gathered here today. Okay, so this is from HB 1. And the section reads, using funds under the Higher Education Coordinating Board, Section A, the board shall study the effectiveness of the professional nursing shortage reduction program in addressing the shortage of professional nurses in the state. The study shall be conducted in coordination with a work group convened by the coordinating board and composed of representatives from the State Nursing Association, Texas Board of Nursing, Department of State Health Services Center for Nursing Workforce Studies, nursing deans and directors from public and private institutions of higher education in the state, and other stakeholders as appropriate. In conducting this study, the coordinating board shall examine the structure and efficiency of the program, as well as other state funding strategies to address the nursing shortage. The coordinating board shall report the results of this study, as well as any recommendations to improve the state's efforts to address the nursing shortage to the legislature by November 1, 2020. So we'll talk about that towards the end of the meeting, because that deadline, as we backwards design the timeline, we really need to be thinking about having this report done by August at the latest, probably August 1st we should shoot for, because there are some timelines within the coordinating board protocol that we have to meet in order to meet that deadline to the legislature. So, but again, we'll talk about more of that at the end of the meeting. So as part of that mission of level setting at this meeting, I'd like to turn things over to Julie, Dr. Eklund, to share information on the design and implementation of the program.
Thank you. I've put together, with a lot of help from Mr. Ed Buchanan, who many of you may know. He actually works here at the coordinating board and helps and does the brunt of the work in terms of administrating the program. So I have a presentation where I'll first just give you an overview of how the current programs work, and then we did supply everyone with some data about the programs, and I put some of those data onto some slides at the end of the presentation, so we can take a look at that as well before we move forward. So let's see, without further ado. And one thing I think we'll probably want to have some clarity on is sometimes we refer to this as the Nursing Shortage Reduction Program, but it includes 3 separate programs, as you are all probably aware. So probably trying to be clear if we're talking about the programs overall or referring to a specific program? Because as you know, the details really do vary in terms of how the 3 different programs work. So this slide is just overall, and the purpose of the program is to provide incentive funding to institutions to increase professional nursing graduates and enrollments of students seeking initial nursing licensure. And the programs are open to professional nursing programs in several sectors: our public state institutions, not-for-profit state institutions, and community colleges. Here are the 3 separate programs, including the funding for FY20 and FY21. We have $20 million, so it's $10 million per year. So for the regular program, $3.3 million, the over 70 program, $4.5, and the under 70, $2.1. So let's talk a little bit about the elements of the program. The regular program is open to all professional, and that includes the RN to BSN nursing programs. It was started in 2006. Institutions apply yearly. Applications are due in September. I know those very recently went out, and the awards are yearly. It's based, this program is based on the historical increase in nursing graduates, and this information comes to us on the Coordinating Board's graduation report, our CBM 009. So it includes all of those RN to BSN and professional nursing graduates. The typical award is about $3,000 to $3,500 per graduate, and the award must supplement current nursing program funding. So if the funding decreases, then the institution is not eligible for the award. This must be in addition to the current program funding for your program. The key elements of the over 70 program, and this program and the under 70 were added in 2010. Oh, thank you. So nursing programs have to have a graduation rate of over 70% to be eligible for the over 70 program. And this application is over a 2-year period. So it's you apply for 2 years, and each year is awarded separately. The awards are based on increased enrollments set by the Coordinating Board, and we actually consult with the eligible nursing programs. We get information from them in terms of setting these targets, and then the institutions are advanced award funds. And the advanced funds, you will see, are for both the over 70 program and the under 70 program, which you're probably familiar with. The institutions then must earn those funds, or they must repay any earned funds at the end of the period. The typical base award is $10,000 per initial licensure, and really the focus of the over 70 and under 70 is initial licensure. The enrollment increase is based on initial licensure data as published by the Nursing Workforce Studies group. So again, important to keep that in mind for this particular program. We take the data from that program. In terms of the graduation rates, those are calculated here at the Coordinating Board using those. For many of you are probably familiar with our RPA codes, our restricted program admission codes, which are very important in terms of the program and understanding how your institutions are performing. And then finally, the over-target awards are about $3,500 to $4,000 per enrollment increase in terms of this program. So those are for institutions that have gone beyond the targets they've set. Again, the base award is about $10,000. Okay, in terms of the under 70 program, the key elements, it was added at the same time the over 70 was added in 2010. This is for nursing programs with a graduation rate of under 70%. So this is for those programs that haven't reached the 70. The application, again, for a 2-year period, and one award is for the full 2-year period, so it's not one per year. The award is based on increased graduates of initial licensure nursing students as reported on the 009. So again, the over 70 is for enrollments for those initial licensure nurses. This is based on increased graduates for those initial licensure nursing students as reported to the Coordinating Board. The RPA codes, of course, are very important for this as well. The targets are determined by the institutions, and the institutions are advanced the award funds, and they must repay anything unearned. The typical base award for this program program is $8,100, I think, per year, or $16,200 per graduate if you're looking at over 2 years. And the over-target award for these is about $7,000 for a student, for a graduate per year. It ends up being $14,000 over the course of time. And I'm going to look at Mr. Buchanan, make sure I got that correct. Okay. So any questions about the 3 programs in terms of the basic overview? I think most of you are familiar with them at this point in time, probably more familiar with the ones that you participate in. But any questions? Okay. And just a slide on administration requirements. Institutions have one assigned contact that makes it easier for us in terms of administering the program. And institutions have almost 5 fiscal years to expend their awards. In the case of when the money is advanced, it is, I believe, and I'm going to look at Mr. Buchanan, it's 5 years altogether, including that period of time. The award expenditures are restricted to costs related to the approved categories within the nursing program. Those are fairly broad categories for those of you who are, again, work closely with the program. We asked institutions to document the basis of expenditure classification in case the programs are audited, and audits are required for awards over $500,000. The application submission deadlines, and here's just some things I wanted to mention in terms of how we administer the program. We try to be strict about our deadlines. Again, there's a lot riding on this. The 009 reporting is due on October 1 for the nursing graduates, so we need to collect some data early for this program. Over 70 and under 70 programs, it's really critical that we get those RPA codes reported to the coordinating board in a timely and accurate way, and we want to make sure the institutions review prior to submission. So I think that, as you can see, there are a lot of considerations in terms of participating in the program. And finally, this is just a slide about our RPA codes. These are the special codes that are reported to us so that we're able to track graduates. So that's the completion of the overview, and I've got information here, again, from Mr. Buchanan, who administers the program. He's obviously going to be assisting us as well in terms of providing information for this group. But we did decide to pull some data to also share with all of you in terms of the programs. We would be happy also if there's additional information that we have available to provide that to the group. There's some information that we don't have. There might be some information that our associations will have and can provide, but we will certainly be happy to share anything that we do have available. So please do keep that in mind. And I'm also happy to share our RPA codes for those of you who aren't familiar, so you can see the type of information that we have. One challenge is that we have the RPA codes for those of you who are participating, but for some institutions, if they aren't participating, we don't have a lot of confidence in those codes in all cases. So again, something to keep in mind. So here is the information about the pre-licensure admissions. And this is, you can see the variation over time in terms of these data. We sent you actually the table that's behind this bar chart, but you can see we had some fluctuation. The program grew until 2011, was essentially flat from 11 to 12, had large growth again 12 to 13, and then we saw a big drop in 13, 14, started building up again, so essentially by 15, 16, we're about where we were in 12, 13, and then we have seen increases in the last 2 school years, so 16, 17, and 17, 18. So again, this is the pre-licensure admissions for those students who have not previously had an RN. But we also pulled some data for our overall RN, for overall nursing graduates, and this would include our RN to BSN program. So the patterns look a little bit different here, as you can see, the growth over time. And again, the last couple of years have been fairly strong. It was up flatter 14, 15, 16. We didn't see quite as many fluctuations for this particular group. Again, probably because of some of the changes that led to the growth in those RN to BSN programs. In terms of the nursing graduates, we've seen the largest growth, if you don't account for our career colleges, which is a very tiny little amount there, but we've seen the largest growth there at our public universities in terms of overall RN graduates. And you can see for the other sectors, our 4 years and our community colleges. We've seen some growth, but as you can see with the 2-year colleges, they, in 13, 14, 12, 13, 14, we had a lot of graduates, and that's leveled out since that time. And then finally, I wanted to share some information about returned funds, and of course with the over and under 70 program, as I mentioned before, institutions need to earn their funds. They set their targets, and if the targets aren't reached, they need to return funds. And we have seen some patterns change over time in terms of returned funds from programs. And you can see for the over 70, we saw very little at the beginning, but then the growth in terms of the number of institutions was quite high, especially in 16 and 17. It dropped off a little bit in 18, and that matches some of the data that we just looked at. The under 70 program, we have increasingly seen funds that institutions had to return. We also occasionally see funds that are returned after the end of the 5-year period that the institutions have not expended. So a little bit of information about some changes we've seen in the program over time. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes?
And just a point, the funds that are returned do go into the regular program and are expended there, correct?
Yes, that's important to understand, that the funds that are returned go into the regular program, and as I explained, the regular program, there are more types of nursing degrees that are eligible for that program in terms of graduates as compared to the under and over 70, which are focused on those initial licensure nurses. And I believe that change came through, I'm going to look at Ms. Buchanan, in 2012, something like that the funds could be 2012, yeah, could be rolled over and into the regular program if they weren't expended for the over and under 70. Now, I believe that, and many of you are probably familiar with the legislative funding. It's been $20 million approximately per biennia for the last 2 sessions. Prior to that, it was $33 million. We did, in terms of expending funds and thinking about even if you had some kind of a limit overall per nurse on that regular program, it was prior to the drop, we were reaching a point where we had very, very large amounts, which were rolling into the over 70. That has reduced some in terms of the amount of money available in the regular, which makes sense given the change in funding. So anything else about the history of the program, or again, we just wanted to provide some background to begin the discussion, and we are happy to share any additional information.
Okay. Seeing no hands raised, I'd like to move forward. So I'm moving on to agenda item 4 on the formal agenda. We're really interested in learning what challenges and opportunities have you experienced or observed with this program? How about we start with challenges? If you'd be willing to share, and it may be that you've observed something from your perspective at DSHS or at the Nursing Association, not necessarily at an institution, but certainly we're interested in learning what challenges you faced as an institution in terms of the implementation as well. And as you share your thoughts, think about, what do you think may be the source of the challenge? Is it the design? Is it the implementation? Is it needing more information? Anything we were happy to hear? Yes.
I'm Marla Urban Roseman, and I'm the president of the Texas Organization of Baccalaureate and Graduate Nursing Education. We had our meeting a couple weeks ago, and talked about the programs again and what some of the challenges were. And I think from a lot of the institutions, they're just at the point of saturation. It's to add more seats is almost impossible. They've gotten to the point that clinical space is a problem. Faculty, finding faculty and paying faculty and having those lines, those are challenges that I would say most of our organizations, at least at the baccalaureate and higher level, are facing.
Yes, I'm Tracy Cooper from Temple College. One of the challenges we have is we use these funds to hire new faculty so we can increase our enrollment. We're turning away over 200 students a year because we don't have faculty. And we just received our notice of how much we're getting. I can't plan because I don't know how much we're getting per student until right now, and then we get it in November. So that doesn't leave me time. I have to ask my board for new faculty positions early, and so it's very difficult to know. I actually had put a spreadsheet together of all the different options I thought that we might receive with this. We knew we would get money, but we didn't know how much. I missed it. I totally missed it. I was hitting all the options we thought we would have, and so it's just really difficult for us to plan ahead of time to know, can we hire 2 new faculty or just 1 with the funds?
Is that true for other institutions also?
Brenda Nichols from Lamar University. Some of our successes have been in what we've been able to do in our skills lab and in our sim labs. The money has provided a great deal of funding for updating equipment. We spent a large amount making our sim area and then spent this money to help bring it up to snuff. We also use it for supplementing faculty salaries. Biggest challenge for us is when we have rain events called Harvey or Imelda, then the next year we graduate a whole bunch, but then the next year the numbers are down and then they go back up. The real piece would be kind of, as Tracy mentioned, maybe looking at a 2 or 3 year pattern rather than these one-off patterns. It just seems too curt and too whimsical at the end to figure out what you're going to get from them.
Nancy Farrenwald, Texas A&M. I think the funding has done quite a bit to advance pathways towards advanced education in nursing. Looking back at the data over time, yes, we've increased the number of new licensed graduates of nursing, but we've also invested a great deal of the state's money into RN to BSN education, which is a pipeline towards a graduate education. Now that we've made that investment, I would agree that the faculty shortage is imploring us to consider these funds for graduate education in nursing.
This is Jonas from Ranger College. I think for us, our situation is unique because we're in a very rural area, and we only have 1 hospital in the area available for students to do clinical. So we've created sort of like alternative clinical rotations. The hospital can only take 10 students at any one time. And right now in this class that's getting ready to graduate, we had about 49 students. So we had to create different models for them to get their clinical practicum. But what that has meant for us is that we have opportunities which we've developed for LVN to RN pathway, and we're trying to grow our numbers in there. But being that in the area where we are situated, we can only do so much, and we can't grow without the infrastructure in our own immediate area. Thank you.
I would say that one of the benefits of the program really has been the ability to use that money in various ways, such as I know I've used the money for my simulation labs. Lots of times to be able to grow the number of, or to graduate the number of students I need to graduate, because that allows me to not have to use the facilities, the clinical facilities as much. And so it reduces the burden that I'm placing on the region, but yet allowing me in some respects to have a better educational outcomes by having this intense simulation. And I know the coordinating board has given innovation grants in the past, and I think that has really helped too. It's not part of this, but it really has helped the facilities.
Yes.
This is Holy Church, and with the University of St. Thomas in Houston. And I'd like to start by saying that we've been incredibly grateful for the program. I mean, it's been really, really beneficial. And we're thankful for Mr. Buchanan. I would say I think I share the view of some of the challenges that have been brought up. The timelines don't always line up with institutional decisions. I think, and to some extent, because it's difficult to predict the amount that will be available, I've tended to use the money for things like retention services and other that have been very beneficial. But it's a little bit, I have the same experience that the director at Temple College raised, which is using funds in a way that is stable enough to allow me to hire full-time faculty with it. So I think that's one of the issues. I would also say I agree with the Texas Organization of Baccalaureate and Grad Nurse Educators that we are, I think, given the faculty issues, I think looking at some of the funding for graduate education, this may be a timely thing to consider. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ume from Tarrant County College. I am not sure everybody has this issue, but I am struggling to spend the money because how the Division of Nursing believe to how we spend and our grants office believe how we should spend are not congruent. So sometimes I struggle, I want to spend this way, but the grants office think that it's won't be a good idea. For example, I would like to send faculty to out-of-state conferences, but our grants office do not believe that it's sufficient way to spend grants. So there's an incongruency within the college.
Yes.
Nina Almosi with Austin Community College. I would have to say for ACC, we've been able to have more successful efforts in increasing graduation. And as Dr. Urban Roseman mentioned, increasing enrollment at this point is not feasible because of the several challenges we face, but we have more success in increasing graduates. As a fairly new department chair, one of the challenges I faced was when I got the position in 2017 was becoming familiar with these grants, and we had multiple awards and grant years, and just keeping track of those, and they're in the college's restricted accounts division, just keeping track, understanding systematically what can they be spent on, with their time limits. That was a true challenge for me. And now, as I have become more familiar with these grants, and I'm able to now see, I can spend it on, for example, like you mentioned, faculty conferences, I'm realizing some grants are older, and the sense of urgency has now kicked in. So it comes with its own reservations, worries, and but the benefits absolutely, of course, outweigh those challenges. We are able to do a lot with those money.
So I think one of the things we're interested in learning more about is you mentioned first there's the issue of how the money can be spent, but then when the money needs to be spent. Can you share some about the timeline on expending funds, and are you able to advance funds forward to a different year to spend within the timeline of the appropriation?
Right, or thinking about those advanced funds, I think, is that what you were referring?
Yes, that's
So
what I'm referring.
the money that's advanced, but you don't know if you've earned it yet. Are there challenges affiliated with that haven't been raised at this point?
Linda Lane with Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center. We applied for the Over 70 program for 2018-2019, knowing that we would have some growth, but not enough to keep all the money. And we did have to send some back, but in the second year, we'll almost meet our target and get to keep most of it. So it's really, but you can't really spend them. Like, I have to wait till January now for the numbers to know how much I'm really going to get to keep. And so you have to grow, but you can't use the money to grow because you have to wait until you get it. So it's really frustrating.
Linda Yoder from the University of Texas at Austin. I wanted to respond to that previous question. I agree with the point about saturation. At some of the schools, we've saturated what we can do in terms of building space, classroom seats for our students. But also, we have a unique situation at UT Austin in that we have this whole group of pre-licensure students that never get a BSN. And so I don't know if you all help us support that program. It's called the Alternate Entry Program, and these students come to us with an undergraduate degree in something else. They spend 1 year as an undergrad, essentially, in the last year of nursing school, and we open the fire hose and teach them everything they need to know to pass the NCLEX. And then they pass the NCLEX. They still don't have a nursing degree, but many of them go to work part-time while they matriculate into our master's program. And then 18 months later, their graduating degree is actually an MSN. So they are indeed pre-licensure students as they come in, and there are about 40 to 45 of them a year. And so if we're not getting credit for that, I would say that we need to look at how we can do that, even though they're not a traditional RN to BSN or typical undergraduate to BSN student. They're still pre-licensure students. And we have been increasing those numbers steadily. I think we're stuck at the number that we're at currently just because of faculty and space. But then there are also in cities like Austin, with a number of nursing schools competing for clinical placements to include in long-term care, even with using simulation to a great degree, we have problems with clinical placements, not only for our undergraduate students, but for our graduate students.
Does anyone else want to comment on how, on the challenges they're facing or that they've observed from the field?
I will say from the organization is that a number of the schools did express their frustration with the fact that they did have to give the money back lots of times. So they did not spend their money until they knew that they were going to keep it. I know I'm one of them that when I got an over 70, I'm not spending this money to, I know that it's my money to spend, so then that delays it. I know that was one of the concerns that I know Mr. Buchanan has come to our meetings a few times and asked why we weren't spending our money, because there was this big pot of money still sitting there. And that was one of the reasons, is that everybody was afraid they'd have to give it back. And so if you spent it and then you had to give it back, where was that money going to come from? So.
Yes.
I would just say a related issue is to be able to spend the money on increasing faculty. You often have to make some commitment to that faculty member. Even though we use a lot of one-year contracts, they won't quit a really good position to come work for us unless we can pretty much assure them that if performance is good, that they would have an ongoing position. So I think that has been a challenge in terms of using the money to increase faculty in as timely a way as sometimes would be desired. Thank you.
So sustaining that faculty position is the challenge.
Right. I fear that I would make an error on not hiring someone versus making the error on hiring this year, letting them quit a good position, because we only want people who are really in good positions now to come to us. But I need some assurance that I'm going to be able to sustain that position because I don't want to hurt the person and I don't want to hurt our school's reputation.
Have any of you, I mean, I know you've all talked about how the program has been good for building out your simulation labs, improving your equipment, and it has definitely been beneficial to increasing licensures. What about this issue of spending the money on time? Are there any successes that we can share with each other?
It depends what program you're talking about. I mean, if you're talking about the regular program, I don't have trouble spending my money at all. If I get the money, that, you know, I can spend it on faculty, I spend it on retention, spend a lot of money on retention and graduation for those students. One thing that I use for faculty is because we're challenged with clinical sites. We have a lot of students at clinical sites. Well, you have to have observation of the students or clinical oversight. So I hire teaching assistants to help with those observations, and that's really beneficial. And I hire that from these funds. So it always, to have the 4 years to spend them has just been very beneficial, at least to my institution.
Yes.
I think we've really benefited in being able to use some of the funds to support our simulation activities and areas.
Okay. Yes.
We've used the funds totally just for faculty salaries, but we have done what we call a market adjustment in order to give our existing faculty a little bit of a bump to help with retention of faculty. So it's not just to try to get new faculty in, but to help out our faculty that have been there.
When you give your faculty a bump, do you rely on these funds to keep that salary? I mean, you have to pay the salary again next year.
It's not a stipend, but it works like a stipend.
Okay.
So they all understand that their market adjustment is coming from these funds, and if these funds go away, that they will no longer have that. Although there was a year or two in there that we didn't have funds, and our college was able to maintain that. That's just a possibility that they all understand. It's not a part of their actual base salary. It's like a stipend.
We use a lot. We don't have any trouble spending our dollars, but I try to save them for the last. Use my other funds first. We spend a lot on part-time or clinical faculty to help with the clinicals, and in teaching also. So a lot of it goes to adjunct faculty.
Yes.
I have been spending majority of time, money to buy textbooks for underrepresented population students with the economical challenges. And also, we spend some money for Student Success Center. We ask faculty to work extra load to teach underrepresented populations and students who are struggling with passing courses, and we pay extra stipends for those faculty.
I've also used the money for a peer tutoring center that so you can pay the students to do tutoring.
You know, it's just interesting to me, the different ways that are spent, the money spent that I hadn't thought about. Because we use student tutors a lot, but I never thought could use this money for that. So it might be helpful if we had a more comprehensive list of the different ways institutions are spending the money.
Would you be willing to share
We've also
that?
used it to buy computerized assistants and review programs, updating some of the stuff we had in our lab.
I think that would be very helpful because everyone wants to spend the money correctly, and that usually includes engagement of many administrators, financial officers, as well as the leaders of programs. And to have a little bit more information of examples of things that would be considered acceptable, I think would prompt a lot of discussions, and that would be helpful to me.
One other thing that someone said that their school thought of this as a grant, but I thought this wasn't considered a grant. When I read about it, it says it's not considered a grant. So you have to make your institution understand what kind of money it is. If I wanted, my accounting department is telling me I can't use this money for scholarships for students, but when I read it, and I haven't, but when I read about the guidelines, it seems like it would be acceptable. But they say it comes from the state and you can't use it for scholarships. So have y'all ever used it for scholarships? So you can't use it, is that right?
I'm going to look to Mr. Buchanan, but I don't believe. Oh, go ahead. Feel free to.
Actually, would you come forward?
Yeah,
and
would you
grab
come
a
forward so we
microphone?
can give you a microphone, or I'll bring you one.
I'll talk generally first to answer your question. The allowable expenditures in the rider should be looked at as goals to be accomplished by your institution. And those goals are quite broad. If the particular expenditure you have in question will accomplish those goals, then it's allowable. That decision is something that you and your institution need to make and document in case you're audited. But it's my understanding that that giving financial aid to students is allowable under the expenditure guidelines.
We have actually been talking fairly recently. The question has arisen about how to view these funds, because I believe we refer to them in one location as a grant, but they are handled a little bit differently than grants funds are generally, because it's more of an appropriation. There is not a competitive grant process.
I think
yes.
that these funds, we're going to be removing the grant language from the program announcement and future program announcements when they're released. This money you're receiving is actually should be considered formula funding. It just so happens that in order to administer it, it's been trusteed to the coordinating board so we can do the calculation and pay you the money. It has a different character than as if you received a grant.
I have a question that's unrelated to this, so I don't know if there's more discussion on the scholarships.
Does anyone else have a follow-up question for Ed about using the money to support students? Go ahead.
Okay, my question is, this grant was really intended, or the program was really intended to target the nursing shortage and pre-licensure students, because we were projected, in 2009, we were working on development of the program, the projected shortage, which now we know is projected to continue. And I've heard presentation about the funds being very helpful in developing simulation centers, which offloads the demand for the clinical site placements. I'm wondering, as we look at nursing and looking at healthcare moving more and more into community settings, has anyone used the funds specifically to develop clinical education in more community-based settings, which I don't think are as well utilized as our typical acute care hospital settings?
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Jonas from Ranger College. In fact, that's what we are actually doing now. Being that in my own location, we only have the one hospital that can only take 10 students at any time. I've reached out, we're partnering with many other alternative healthcare settings. We just got an MOU with Brownwood Health Department, where we're doing alternative and community and population health kinds of things. But that's what we're working on now to help offload again that pressure that we face. We're revising some of our learning outcomes so that students still get to learn those competencies, but in a different setting. So we're actually working on that right now.
A related question, would the funds used be broad enough to set up a dedicated teaching unit in a hospital or facility where the funds were used to pay hospital employees to help teach and precept the students with the goal of increasing clinical education opportunities?
I have had the same idea and wondered if it might be a better use of one way to spend the funding is to help with the clinical placements, is to partner with the hospital some way, either as an incentive or, like you said, what you have is a great idea, I think, but in working with all the hospitals. I know we pay a lot of groups now for clinical placement, like in Austin, there's that, I can't think of the name of it. We have to pay so much a year to help with our placement, and there's in Dallas, we have to pay Dallas-Fort Worth Hospital Council for placements, and even then, they're a little hard, they still have to find them, but it's in the other areas where you have, like in Lubbock, we have 3 or 4 schools of nursing vying for the same hospital space, and there's just so much you can do, and we're trying to stay away from paying our coaches or preceptors in the hospitals because it gets really expensive, and once you start, you open up the door to all programs. So you want to really think hard about it, but is there a better way to do it? And maybe using this money might be a way to do it.
Can you speak to the funds using the use?
Yeah, and I certainly also wanted to address that as my hope is that as the work group goes on, that there'll perhaps be ideas that will surface whether or not it's something that would be appropriate with the way the program is currently structured. It might be something to think about in terms of the future, and so to me it's nice to hear folks talking about how they're using the money and maybe some potential ways it could be used that it isn't being used now. So again, I wanted to mention that. One of the challenges, speaking as one of the 2 coordinating board members of the work group, ad hoc members, but one of the challenges for us has been how this is a very difficult program to administer. And as I hear some of these questions raised, I think it also causes some confusion in some cases at your institutions. There's a lot of challenges with the structure. I think the program, in terms of opportunities, I think the program was very, very successful for a long time. We have seen some changes, which is why I was pleased to see a writer for us to have the opportunity to talk about it. So I did want to sort of bring that back too, that I hope we're able to save some of these ideas, even if we're not able to get to whether right now it's something that would fit, but certainly to think about in terms of the future of the program and as we're discussing this and as we're called here to do. So hope that's helpful.
Yeah, Ed.
Thank you. I'd like to address Dr. Mervin's example that she cited. And I think I will do that by asking the question, by using those funds that way, what will you accomplish? What is the end result?
It could be possible with the development of the right partnership that a whole unit could be set up for the purpose of teaching. And I would take a partnership between a university and a facility, an agreement that from the very beginning, a very big part of their choice of staff, the type of unit it would be, would match the clinical education needs and offer opportunities for clinical education that may not exist now.
And the
our
result
students
of doing that would be what?
I think it would have to be evaluated, but the goal would be that the students could have opportunities for higher quality clinical rotations
Okay, so
within a dedicated unit.
So one of the results is going to be perhaps an increase in graduates?
Ultimately,
Okay, and that's an acceptable goal under the program guidelines. I think that as a general statement, there's been too much of a focus on what you're spending the money for versus what you're trying to accomplish. Because if spending money on Post-it stamps help increase graduates, it's an allowable expenditure. So you need to look at what you're accomplishing by the expenditure. If setting up that partnership and organizing it that way is going to increase retention in your staff or increase graduates or any of the other goals outlined in the program announcement, it's allowable. The way the statute is written, that's perhaps the only reasonable way it could be interpreted is these were goals to be accomplished because the statute didn't give you a specific checklist of allowable expenditures as such. It gave you broad guidelines, which we recommend you interpret as goals to be accomplished. Does that answer your question?
it does.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
We are done with our first hour almost, so I'd like to move on, but if you want to go ahead and share your comments quickly.
My comment simply is that the issue that Ms. Lane brought up earlier is whether or not I get to keep it is one of the issues that makes trying to do a nurse unit or that kind of a research partnership hard to manage, because since it's a one-year piece and I don't know if I'm going to meet my goal this year or how much I'm going to have to give back, it makes it harder to have that kind of a relationship with them. So I'm really pleased to hear that we could do some of that, but I'm also concerned about losing the money at midway through and then really being stuck with a partner who's looking for us to do our share and we can't.
Right. So, I'm sorry.
I just want to share a different perspective on the use of the funds for that purpose. It's been my experience that our healthcare system partners are willing to invest in our programs when we take on those innovations. In other words, award us some funding so that we can do these things together. So for us, when the funds are used to support the hospitals, what it has led to is our students show up on the unit where they normally have clinical, and there are additional students there who were not at the table when we negotiated those placements, but they're placed there because the hospital staff person is being paid by a school of nursing. So it creates a challenge for us to maintain the quality of the clinical experiences for our students.
Did you want to share something, Stacy? Okay.
Okay. I just wanted to comment, I appreciate the difficulty getting funds and not knowing if you're going to meet your targets and have to pay it back, and the dilemma and the challenges that creates. I do want to offer, just historically, previous to that, funds were only available after the increase was accomplished. And the feedback from deans and directors of schools of nursing was that, well, it's really hard to implement a change if we don't have the funding up front. So that was kind of that balance. And it's imperfect. It's imperfect getting the funds after. You have to make the investment and you get it reimbursed, so to speak. It's difficult to get the funds up front and then not be able to fully use them because you're concerned about paying it back. So that may be a decision point in terms of, is it an either or? Do you prefer one or the other, or do you still like this having kind of the opportunity for both? You can apply for upfront funds and you can participate in the regular program. Or would you, do you prefer just having a one approach? There was more flexibility built into the program, so this time, so you're not limited that 12 and 18%, which I think is has become more and more challenging for schools. So I don't know how that will work, but just for some historical context of why that was introduced.
Thank you.
My question was sort of a bigger one, which was, does everybody pay for clinicals, or do you just pay for somebody to find you clinicals? I mean, it seems like that's a real challenge to all nursing programs. It's a challenge to all health professions, but, and how much do you pay? I'm just curious.
It depends on what level of student you're talking about. For the undergraduate students, pre-licensure students, some of us pay to belong to a clinical placement system. So for instance, here in the Austin area, it's $16,000 a year for us to be able to belong to that. And it's a system, and so it's a computerized system that the hospitals and the schools participate in, so the available units are there, and it's complicated, but it's not as simplistic as that. But anyway, that's the price for that. At the graduate level, and then I know there's some other institutions that pay differently for clinical sites, it's depending on whether or not that they use the nurse as a preceptor, and they pay them differently. But at the graduate level, there are some schools that probably pay for preceptors for their graduate students, for their especially nurse practitioners. I would say overall, most institutions don't pay for those preceptors, but it is going in that direction more because preceptors want to be paid. Physicians and nurse practitioners want to be paid because they feel that their time that they're expending with the student is taking away from their billable hours to take care of patients.
So I would like, well, first to say this has been a really great discussion. You've raised the issues that we've I believe, have heard over time, so it's helpful to hear it in a single context. I kind of want to take a step back now and think about, when Cindy described the origins of the program, it was designed to increase new licensures. So what if we took a step back and started there, not thinking about this particular program, but with that in mind, with the original purpose, in your opinion, what would help with the nursing shortage in Texas? If you have peers in other states or in other places where you've seen programs that have been successful, that might be something you could think about. But from your perspective, what would be helpful that we haven't tried? Or maybe we tried it and for whatever reason, it's no longer something we're doing. So we just wanted to give you take a chance to step back a little and hear your ideas on that. Yes.
This is Jonas from Ranger College. This is a really, really broad one, but just to highlight a couple of things. I know we can all at least agree to the fact that one of the main issues, especially in my program, we're facing aging faculty. So we do not have enough younger nurses who want to move into educational roles. I currently have about over 50% of my faculty who would be retiring within the next 5 years. And there's just not enough pool or interested candidates who want to teach because they could make more money in a clinical environment. So I don't know what we can do to help make, education or academia much more attractive. Because we have, and I know we'll have right now for the spring semester, at least 50 plus candidates who want to get in. But being with the limited size of my faculty, we just can't take them. So that's one of the things. So there is a great potential even within the rural healthcare setting, but my program just doesn't have the infrastructure to serve the needs of those students. So I think we'll have to look at, that's one thing we can look at too.
So maintaining or growing faculty?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I would say, of course, strategies to increase graduation, retention of students, especially in this area at ACC anyway, a lot of our students are working parents or single parents, and just staying in school while having to work is a great challenge. So in that perspective, but I would also say to help with the nursing shortage, we can look at ways to retain existing nurses and decrease the high turnover that we face, especially in this area with our new graduates. So perhaps look into that and find out what is causing this high turnover in our new graduates, and can we implement some strategies to help them stay, or also advance their education, such as RN to BSN programs, help provide nurses who are currently working to advance their education and stay in their jobs.
I'll speak to this from the perspective of my peers. When we had the TBOGNI, Texas Organization of Baccalaureate and Graduate Nurse Educators meeting about a week and a half ago, Dr. Urban Roseman and I had a discussion with our colleagues about this meeting today and what would they offer to bring to the group. And here we're I'll highlight three. There were many suggestions, but I'll highlight three. One of our deans who has not applied for these funds for many years because, as she put it, I can't take any more students. So it's a disincentive for me to think that I can just keep growing when we don't have capacity. And this is not a dean from a rural area. This is a dean from an urban area. Her suggestion was that we look at ways to look strategically at the future of nursing in Texas, a really down the road view of what is it that nursing is going to need for the future of health and healthcare in Texas. And a suggestion that came from the group was adding value to our nurses with less about degrees and more about retooling, new certificates, new courses, added credentialing, funding of predoctoral and postdoctoral stipends for graduate students in nursing, a payback requirement if people benefit from these funds or any kind of funds, time enroll for the schools that receive the fund. That was a suggestion. And then there was a statement about innovation, and that we really need to innovate rather than keep doing the same thing that we're doing. And that we have to, if we innovate, we set ourselves up for potential failure, because that's what innovation is. It's trying something that perhaps hasn't been tried before, at least in the context that you're trying it. So then the incentive based on success model might have to look a little bit different, and it might be a larger pool of funds for some projects that take us to a new level. Reduce the risk posture, in other words. The other suggestion was that as we're looking toward these alternate care settings, which are not really alternate care settings, are outside the hospital, community-based care, I think with the movement towards where people are seeking and accessing health care and the value-based initiatives of our healthcare system, it behooves us as educators of registered nurses in particular to engage them in that value-based care work. It's hard to do that in Texas. There aren't a lot of RNs working in primary care. But if we were able to leverage these funds to innovate that and try some nurse-led models of that, that might really benefit the people of Texas. It also might reduce our expenditures in terms of CMS funds or Medicaid dollars. But that's a kind of long-term picture of that discussion. There may have been a few other things too that Marla remembers.
Julie, I know you've been trying to.
I do want to offer an observation, just because I'm coming from a very outside, I'm not a nurse, I'm an attorney, and I'm fairly new to this position as well, so I have a bit of an outside perspective, and I just think it would help to place this into context that this very much affects nurses and nursing, but this is a multidisciplinary issue, that there is a health care shortage, period, across the board, that exists beyond our state. So I think there may be some self-imposed limitations that have come from how we regulate, not just how we get nurses licensed or how we start someone off as an LVN and grow them from there, but where we're going past that. And I think that exists in other contexts as well, dental, physicians, psychologists, and mental health providers as well. I think part of it is also realizing that the provision of medicine may be changing, and there may be opportunities for innovation, looking at telehealth, like you were saying. You know, it's not necessarily that the type of care you're giving is changing, but the setting you're giving it in is changing. And I think, you know, there's more of a swing to that and adjusting to that and making sure that the limitations that are imposed on the funds are not self-imposed, that they're the requirements of the appropriation themselves and not beyond that. And then just, again, the context that numerically speaking, as the population of Texas grows, will there ever not be realistically a shortage of healthcare providers given the number of nurses and assistants and every kind of role of healthcare provider? Will there ever not be a shortage? And just giving a little bit more realistic context to the problem, because y'all deal with this so much in the education realm, and it just from listening, the conversation is, how do we get more licenses? How do we get more people practicing? And I think part of it has to grow and has to change with the context.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry, I'm sorry. Were you?
Well, I've heard two things that really impressed me. If you're thinking shortage of nurses, it means keep the students in nursing school and bring nurses back that aren't practicing anymore, because some people leave nursing. We've already mentioned that. So the first thing is, what we found from looking at programs that are looking at their pass rate, that the main thing that programs do to increase their pass rate is to increase their students and then go back to recognize when they're at risk very early on and provide help for them. And I know that there are times when programs have hired retention specialists or other tutors or people to help the students get through the program. And many students would make it if they had that kind of help. So that's one way, just keep them in school until they finish. And then there are a lot of nurses that aren't working. They've left practice. And how do you get back if you let your license lapse? The board has 3 ways, and one of them is to take a refresher course. And in North Carolina, I read this recently that they had an intentioned effort in bringing nurses back to practice, and they actually established a curriculum and all, and we have kind of that. We have a little more flexibility, but I don't know how many of your programs actually encourage nurses to come back and come to our refresher program so that you can get your license renewed and get back into practice. But those are 2 ways if you're just thinking nursing shortage, to get more nurses, and I think that's the main thing we want to be focused on.
Ume from Tarrant County. I do have vocational nursing program at TCC. I think that it's very important for us to remove some disparities exist between our professional nursing and vocational nursing. Vocational nursing program does not receive any funds. I do have many students applying for vocational nursing program. I asked the question, why did you choose vocational nursing over RN program? Because they already met the criteria to enter to the ADN program. The answer was they cannot afford 2 years of education, 4 years of education. They just need to get the job that what they really want to be, RN, to be nurse. But they just don't have money to spend. So they are just looking for 1 year education, become a nurse, and enter into the pathway to be RN. So it's very important for us to give more opportunities for vocational nurses as well.
And this is Nina Almosi again. Along the lines of what can we do to help with the nursing shortage, one area that I think is an opportunity for a potential partnership between higher education and clinical practice would be addressing the gap that our graduates face in their perception of their preparedness to work. We know there is a gap. Data supports that the schools believe that their graduates are prepared to work, whereas the clinical leadership believes that these graduates are not ready to assume. So I think an area would be partnering to have some innovative transition to practice partnerships, especially in settings with higher turnover rates, such as long-term care settings. And I don't know if that's something that we can engage in after the point of graduation, because we know that transition phase is highly stressful and is associated with high turnover.
Hi, this is Jonas again from Ranger College. I think another area of opportunity to increase the number of nurses is to look at reaching out to underrepresented population groups in nursing. And one of those, which I am a part of, is men in nursing. I sit on the board of the American Association of Men in Nursing, and I chair the membership committee. And it just so happened that with one of my DMP students, who I chair her work, actually worked on a project to increase recruitment of men coming into nursing as a second career. And this DMP project actually was really so good, we submitted it to the federal government for grant funding. And we got the University of Miami to partner with us, and we got awarded $2.5 million just for this initiative to recruit men in nursing. So I think oftentimes we always forget about this underutilized population that we can recruit, because men coming to nursing as a second career most often are more motivated and committed since they've been in some kind of professional role. So I think that's another opportunity for us to exploit. Thank you.
I think that's a great point, and looking at the underrepresented populations, but you still have to have spaces in your programs to take those individuals. So, you know, so that would help with our diversity, but it doesn't really help with getting more numbers. And I think that's some of the issue here is how do we continue to increase our pre-licensure, especially, it sounds like, numbers. That seems to be what the focus of this entire grant was, I guess. I'll just call it grant, just because we've been calling it grant for so long. But I do think going back to the whole, issue of the fact that we have so many faculty that are going to retire, that is going to have a severe impact on nursing education. We haven't seen that impact yet, but in 5 years, the Center for Workforce can probably talk about this a little bit more, but I heard it was like 30% of the nurse educators in Texas are going to retire in the next 5 years. If that's the case,
It's about 20.
It's 20? Okay, somebody told me 30, but so 20%. I mean, even 20% of the nurse educators, that's a fifth of your nurse educators are going to retire in the next 5 years. That's huge. So perhaps there's room to refocus some of this. I know in the regular funding cycle, you do get money for your MSNs that graduate, and any level of nurse that graduates, you do get money for over your amount of nurses that you graduated the year or the 2 years before. But is there any way to reshape this program in some respects to really concentrate on those nurses that will teach, that can teach? I don't know.
Well, I think, especially at the first meeting of this group, all questions are on the table. So these are the kinds of ideas we were hoping to hear. This is what we call, in the innovation territory, a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious problem. It means the solutions will be varied and multi-pronged, and the questions, the problems are really put us in a position to think creatively about how to approach them. And it won't be just one way to approach, as you say. It's a multi-pronged issue. It's healthcare in general, and nursing is one part of that. Thank you again for sharing these ideas. Did you have a comment on the phone?
Yes, I do, actually, and I appreciate all the views that everyone has contributed. And I would add, I think I would agree that two major pieces, I think we all see this, are faculty, access to qualified faculty, and then clinical placement. And even in the Houston area, which has huge hospitals and huge systems, we're overwhelming them, so it's a difficult challenge. I will speak to the discussion of faculty retirements, et cetera. In around the year 2000, I was involved with TNA with a workforce supply and demand study. And at the time, faculty salaries were a major issue. And faculty aging was an issue. That's only worsened. And I realized the salary issue is a complicated one. But I do think, when I entered nursing education in the late 80s, I didn't take major pay cuts moving from a nursing leadership role in clinical service to education. But I think that's a major issue. You look at the national data, and graduate students want to go into advanced practice. This is a good thing. but I do think it has exacerbated the shortage, and I don't think the solutions are easy, but I think that's one of the things that we're dealing with.
Thank you. So at this point, we've talked about challenges and opportunities in using this actual program. We've talked about what if we could step back, what would really help nursing. Is there any other high-level question you think we should be asking today? Yes.
I'm just, so the nursing faculty, I'm hearing as being something that we should really look at. And the funding currently can be used for faculty, although I know there are challenges, and it was brought up about how do you guarantee someone a position but how might that be approached? How might we approach that issue of faculty shortage, which is in part due to the pay structure? We're seeing changes in the number of full-time faculty and part-time faculty starting to converge. So the whole model of academe for nursing is very different than some other professions. How might we rethink, how might we think about addressing the challenges with faculty to ensure that high quality level of faculty as you learn that the brain trust leaves academe?
And I actually have heard conversation around something similar, so it might be a question. Folks talking about the tension between quality and capacity, that yes, we could probably add capacity, but we're really concerned about losing quality just overall in terms of their programs. So I think thinking about that as well as maintaining, quality faculty as we're seeing these changes, what's the best way to do that?
I would say one of our concerns right now in education in terms of maintaining quality is we know in 2023 we are going to the next generation NCLEX, which I think might have some tremendous impact on our on the quality of the nurses that we're producing. I think it's a good way to move. I think we'll get a higher quality product, but I do think there's going to be a short-term implications in terms of the number of nurses that we will graduate, and in terms of passing that NCLEX. So I do think that that's something that you're going to have to think about as we move along.
And that will impact I imagine your concerns about spending, as you're wondering whether or not you can keep the money, so you might have to plan for that dip in 2023. Okay. So, I'm sorry, did you have something to add?
No, it's like we'll be using our money.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else you wanted to add to the sort of big picture question of how to improve or increase the number of new nursing licensures, we can move on. We're nearing the end of our discussion. Based on what we've talked about today, what would you like to know for next time? The next time we convene or you convene as a work group. I know we've talked about perhaps we could share some ideas on how everyone is spending their funds. We have what we have internally. Julie?
I think one thing that would help just on both levels, I think the state has a timeline you all have to operate in and how your UB works. And I think the schools have a different timeline of when they need to have the money and notice to plan. I think it would be great to see a timeline that combines both, or that you could overlay one on top of the other and see where the timeline's not matching up and where there may be some areas for adjustment, and maybe that's where the program needs adjusted, because as currently worded, I was looking at the rider language, and I don't know that between biennia there's UB for y'all. And so maybe that's an area where there could be some possible changes in the future.
May I? It would be helpful if there's someone we could work with who could help us on the sort of nursing time, your timeline, or your concerns with timelines. We can certainly put together something for all three programs in terms of what our timeline looks like, so everyone can kind of have it in front of them. But I don't know if there's someone who would like to work with us in terms of the program timelines, so we can overlay the two. Or are those going to vary, or are they going to be pretty similar across programs?
Would any of the schools be willing to, at least a very generalized, like in this month, this is when we're getting notice, but this is when we do our hiring? I think just something very generic where it's like a period of time to know when you need to make hiring decisions, when the schools are looking at your budgets for the next school year, something like that, just to give us a better idea.
Just sort of a simple layout of how this works timing-wise.
I can perhaps share a little detail that might be informational for you. Obviously, this is an incentive funding program the legislature has established and trusteed money to us. Obviously, that works on, it comes out every biennium for the next 2 years. The regular program, we have to wait until institutions can report their data October 1st. And in actuality, we're having institutions report their data early for this program as opposed to when they would normally report their CBM 009. We have nursing students reported at 10/1. The purpose of that was to move up the disbursement time for the regular program, and institutions should receive their funds for it in October or early November. Now, obviously, you do have a timing issue there. It's probably going to be some point in the future before you can utilize those funds to, say, hire faculty. But I guess there's certain mechanics we have to accomplish. Now, for the over 70 program, since the data comes from the Center for Nursing Workforce Studies, we get that in sometime in January, early February. So, we've held that money all that time. We can't do any disbursements because we don't know how to do the calculation. However, institutions have had their money in advance for the over program. But I think that there is a conflict at the institutions on nursing departments seeing we have this money, and the financial people saying, no, you can't spend it because you might have to give it back. Well, I don't know that that's an issue that we can solve for you. I think it would, to me, would boil down to be an issue between your nursing department and your finance people for y'all to do a better selling job on your financial people and say, yes, we can use this effectively and have alternative plans in case you don't. However, if you can demonstrate to your financial management people that you have the ability to use that money and accomplish your goal, then you might get more cooperation from them. So those are some things, for y'all to consider in terms of the over program. Now, for the under program, it's a 2-year program, and that's the way the legislature designed it. We can't do a settle up and figure out what you've earned until the 3rd year. So there's some built-in timing mechanisms here which would appear to be necessary for the mechanics of figuring out how much money you get. And I don't know that there's an easy way to overcome that.
Right, and and hopefully that more of that will come out in the timeline overlap, so we can see, which, side of the house is it impacting the state versus institution.
Yeah, I think just helpful for moving forward to have a sense of that timeline, and we can certainly add into it what some of the constraints are in terms of when the various reports come in that we use and all of that. But I think it is a good idea moving forward for us to provide that so everyone's clear as we think towards the future. Yeah.
Other ideas on information that will help your thinking on this that we may be able to provide?
I don't know if this information is available, but the proportion of funds over time that have been used for newly licensed nurses and compared to the proportion that have been used for advancing the education of currently licensed nursing who won't be new to the workforce, and if the goal is new to the workforce, it would be nice to know the proportion and how that's changed. Maybe that data is available.
We have some challenges, as I said earlier, in terms of we get the restricted program admission codes from some institutions and not all, and sometimes that data, unfortunately, isn't as clean as I'd like if we're looking as a whole, but we can certainly try to provide something as best we can in terms of what we have. We've shared, I think, the differences in terms of what's gone to the different programs, the under 70 and over 70, and what's rolled over. So maybe we could summarize that a little more clearly, and we will get you as much as we can along those lines and maybe indicate where the challenges are.
Does anyone have a parking lot issue they'd like to address? Mine says data quality, but I think Julie just touched on it again, so something we'll be thinking about as we move forward. But if not a parking lot issue, and other ideas of information that you'd like before we meet again?
I was just thinking about, we're kind of at the end of our growth since 2004, and every year I hold my breath to see if we're going to have additional graduates. In the past, we've received as much as 600,000, 700,000 in a year. Last year, we got 14,000, and this year it's a little bit more. So, you expect that because you get to your saturation point. But I also think we're going to, at least I think, are going to experience a decline in our RN to BSN students, and that could hurt our graduation growth. But we're not really hurting our initial licensure programs. So, and I don't know if anyone else is experiencing that, but I think with the number of places offering the program now, it's been spread out more, and so it's not, except for University of Texas Arlington, there's a huge, but I think that's going to hurt our numbers, and it will look like we're in the negative. So, and I don't know if it's anything anyone else is thinking about.
But I think that's kind of been something people have not talked about much, is that they're really not pre-licensure. They're already licensed, and their role hasn't changed. I'm not saying that we don't want BSNs, RN to BSNs, because we do want to increase the quality of our registered nurse workforce. So by no means am I saying that we should stop that. I just wanted to emphasize that is not the pre-licensure, and their roles really haven't changed. They might be going out to get new jobs that are outside of the hospital, but pretty much their roles don't change when they get that BSN if they're working inpatient in the hospital. But also, I did want to bring up about, we talk about quality of data, and this is happening nationally because we talk about how many qualified applicants do not get admitted, but many times those applicants are counted 3 and 4 times because they're applying to multiple programs. And I know I always encourage nursing students to apply to multiple programs, so if they really want to be a nurse, they'll get in. So I think those students are being counted more than one time. So I do think we need to keep that into consideration.
Is there any interest in pulling data looking at gender in terms of our nursing graduates? Since that was raised, would that be helpful? Trying to think of some of the things I heard. Okay. Yes. So do breakout there. Anything else that we can provide based on what we have? Again, it's challenging. We probably have better data than many folks because we do collect those RPA codes. You know, it's challenging because a lot of students might enter higher education thinking they want to be a nurse, but until someone actually enrolls in that restricted admission program, we wouldn't be counting them. Yes?
One thing that might be interesting, just given the talk about the aging workforce, aging faculty issue, is to see the average age of an entry level as compared to a graduate.
Okay,
in the different programs.
We can do that, yeah.
Okay.
And it will probably follow along the data that I shared that showed all of the graduates earlier. Let me kind of go back to that if it'll let me. So basically, we could take now we could for the pre-licensure, I don't know because we get this information from the Nursing Association. I don't know that we can affiliate age with that, but we can certainly look at our overall graduate counts and look at give you an average age there. And when we're able to do breakouts, because we have RPA codes, we can try to provide that information as well.
One more piece of data suggested by the deans at Tabogny was that when we are presenting data on workforce, it's really helpful to have the Texas workforce data and the national data together for comparison.
Okay, and is there a source for that national nursing data?
Well, I know that the National Council of State Boards of Nursing has data, but also our accrediting organizations, well, it's not, you can't draw the conclusion that it applies to all of us, but the American Association of Colleges of Nursing, I think, accredits a lot of programs in Texas, BSN programs, and we receive an annual report on faculty and students, and I use it for benchmarking diversity. I use it for benchmarking faculty age and retirement. So for me, that works, but it's not inclusive of all programs.
There are some sources for national workforce data. There are a few different ones, and I'll share those, and we can decide what we want to use.
Thank you. Yes, certainly, we're happy to be a clearinghouse. If people on the committee want to share information to share with the rest of the group, feel free to send it to us. We are able to track graduates who stay in Texas into the workforce if they're not self-employed, for example. So we can look to see if we find our nursing graduates in a hospital setting, we get an industry code. We will not know for sure that they're working as a nurse, but we know from some other information that's been studied that generally the pipeline is cleaner for nurses. If you're going into nursing, then there's other fields where we find people might have a liberal arts degree and be doing computer science as well as computer science. That's harder to track, but we can certainly look at some of that information for within Texas if people feel that would be helpful as well. So in other words, are we finding these folks who we're tracking employed in a setting, and we could look out for several years. May I ask, Ginger, is it all right to ask, where do we get the information regarding whether students are no longer in the profession? Is that just lapsed licenses, or is there other information out there available that we could assist with?
I wish I could give you an exact number, but of the nurses coming back and doing a refresher or some other way to renew their license, it's in the hundreds. I know that Virginia put that together recently because we were really looking at the whole idea of bringing nurses back to practice, because this has been done at times when there's a severe shortage, and some states have realized we have nurses who are not practicing. But I think another thing we need to look at is making the work setting more attractive. And why they leave, we don't quite know. As far as national data from NCSBN, I've been on a committee looking at metrics and quality indicators and risk factors for programs. So we went out to all states asking for their annual data, and we probably got 50 kinds of data. There is no normal. So one of our recommendations is going to be some basic essentials that everyone provides.
I was just going to add that one of the sources that we use when we look at those numbers is the Board of Nursing's relicensure data. And I don't know if that's the same source that Virginia was using for the students. So that goes to that. And then just to be clear, she's talking about different national workforce data than I am, but it's also collected by NCSBN. So they also did a national survey of nurses, and they have data for each of the states and then nationally through their sample survey. So.
Are there any other issues, data issues you'd like us to try? Well, not issues. Any other data points you'd like us to share next time? Or information in general? Okay. So I keep saying next time, which means we'll be meeting again. Hopefully I'll see all of you again. But as we think towards our next gathering, what are your thoughts on how the work group will contribute overall to the report? We're imagining that the coordinating board will be taking the lead on doing the heavy lifting of the writing and the research piece. But we do want to work in coordination with you. Indeed, the legislation tasks us to do so. So how do you envision your contribution as a work group?
I guess a question to be able to answer is you start out by saying that, or at least the word study was mentioned in relation to the report. So is a study being designed with a collection of new data as a part of informing the report, or will you be using existing data and input from this group and other groups for the report?
So I will defer to Dr. Eklund on that, if you have any thoughts.
So we have not, we wanted to bring everyone together for this first meeting, and so there is, I think getting feedback from all of you would be helpful. I think there's, in terms of, we need to consider resources moving forward, and but whether we have some kind of additional data collection, use what we have, et cetera, I think a lot of it is going to depend on, some of it will be direction from the group, thinking about, what recommendations might be there. Some of it will depend if we get some additional outside feedback. So I think at this point, we're very early in the process, and we wanted to make sure that we had feedback from people in the field regarding what you think it's important in terms of things for us to be looking at, and getting some direction there. So I'm afraid I can't give you too much of an answer, but it's a very good question, and I think hopefully that will start to emerge a little bit more as we move forward. We do know we have the deadline of November 1st when the coordinating board has to forward the study and recommendations to the legislature, which means it will have to go to a board meeting and a meeting prior to that. So really the coordinating board study, which includes the recommendation, of course, that you all are collaborating with in terms of providing us feedback through the work group, that work will have to be done probably August 1. So we're probably, looking at hopefully making some decisions, having some movement forward fairly soon in terms of collecting the information that you all want to look at, any kind of work that we want to be doing, and making decisions so that something can be ready in the spring, I would think. So by the end of spring, does that?
Thank you. That is helpful. So it sounds like we should be considering, I don't know when you're planning the next meeting, but for having feedback related to maybe some of the issues we talked about today that we can't find answers for in the existing data. I know graduate education came up a lot as an area that perhaps there isn't quite as much data in. So I know I have interest in that.
Yeah, and there's also, we will frequently do a survey if there's information that we feel it's important to gather from institutions. I think looking at a sort of formal data gathering is a very different type of scenario, and generally I think might not be one that's done in this type of situation, but certainly surveying, whether it's to gather quantitative or qualitative data, is something that could be considered if there's a sense that there's some missing information that really would be helpful.
This was partially answered, but I think what would be helpful is kind of a timeline for the scope of work. You mentioned having some product in the spring, but maybe what that timeline looks like, working backwards from November 1st when you have to have it to the legislature.
Yes, for sure.
Yes.
I apologize if you have already provided this. Would it be possible to send us the original bill that the rider was mentioned?
Sure, and I
That would
thought
help.
we did send it, but if we didn't, we'll go ahead and resend that. It includes the rider and, of course, also the detail of how the program is structured overall. So it's in the study is included in that rider in the appropriations bill.
Oh, yes.
Task force or subgroups that maybe we could start on. You mentioned graduate education, which I think was really a good one, nursing faculty, and how to use that and time that. We talked about whether or not there was really truly potential growth in programs, a number of programs that said they were about maxed out because of clinical or others. One was on alternative clinical education, a piece about how to contribute to that. Maybe a summary of some of the uses of funds that some of us have done versus others. And then maybe about limitations, what we see as limits of what is currently in that rider. I think Ed's done a good job of talking about it, but it does make you realize some of the focus is just on growth, and growth is okay, but everybody around here wants quality because nobody wants to wake up and look up at a nurse and go, holy crap, I don't want this turkey taking care of me. And so, there is some piece about a balance, if you will. So at least those are 4 subgroups or 5 that I could think of, and I'm sure these guys could add to that list. But maybe that's a better way than just trying to keep large brainstorming. And I love the idea of timelines, because I think part of our big problem is when his are due, when we report, when we have stuff at the universities and colleges that don't match any of that.
And I will add that we frequently do have, when we have work groups and committees that are formally convened, we frequently do see those groups break out into subgroups to do some of their work in work groups and then bring their work back to the main group, and that can be effective. The other thing we do see sometimes, and we see it sometimes with negotiated rulemaking, is we'll have groups work on a straw man proposal for, here's what an approach or different approaches might look like, so then people can respond to that. So certainly those types of things have been done in the past if this group would like to move forward in that type of direction.
No, it may be too soon to do that, but.
Well, it's certainly something to think about in terms of timeline and capacity, your own personal timeline and capacity. Is that something you are willing and able to contribute to this work? I mean, we would very much like to see subgroups, I think, be able to dig a little bit deeper on each topic, and we're happy to help facilitate that and coordinate that. But again, that's going to be something you decide as a work group, whether or not you want to move forward with that kind of design as a work group. Well, that does get to everything on our agenda. Are there any questions regarding today? we need to set our next meeting. How do you want to coordinate that?
Yeah, it would be helpful actually to have some feedback. And if folks do like the work group model, then the full group meetings might be structured a little bit differently than if everyone did want to come together. And again, we're flexible on what you think works for you. In terms of our travel budget and just what we thought was reasonable, I think we were thinking about 5 to 6 meetings altogether. I think any more than that could be burdensome, which would mean we'd have 4 or 5 more after today. I do know the holidays are coming as well. So I would be happy, we would be happy, and again, I'm going to hand it over to Ginger in terms of facilitation, but we are certainly happy to either send out some kind of a poll to see what works best for everyone for the next meeting, or even better if you all could come to some agreement today, at least about a general outline for when a next meeting would be, whether you want to be in, try to fit something in December. I know it's a very tight timeline and a busy time for all of you, or if early January is better. Again, November will be here at the end of the week. If people wanted to meet that soon, that might be challenging. And certainly discuss anything. I think we have a clear idea of the data that would be needed, that we'll try to pull together. But if there's any other work that we could be doing behind the scenes to help facilitate your work when you come together again.
So at a minimum, how much time do we need as staff to respond to the questions or the requests for data or information?
I think these particular ones aren't going to be too much, so we could certainly do that in time for a December meeting if people wanted to meet again before the holidays, and I think that's doable. Next week probably isn't, but I think that would be fine. I think we're open again to what's going to work best for everyone, or an early January meeting would be an option. Yes.
If there's any nursing education data that's going to be needed, I would recommend January for the next meeting, because we'll have updated data we could share at that point.
Oh, thank you. And that is good. And we actually will have certified graduation data. We have the data now, but it's error-free at this point. We will have we should have final certified graduation data.
Okay, so we're thinking maybe first or second week of January. Does that work for most? Okay. Well, we will finalize that date, and I think that's everything we've covered on the agenda, unless there are any lingering questions or comments that folks want to make before we adjourn. Oh, well, thank you very much again for your time, and we look forward to continuing our work with you.